Well, hello there, beloved Youest listeners, community, soul family. I am, as always, really grateful and honored to be here in your earbuds, to be with you, and really excited about today's guest. I just love her energy. I'm excited to introduce you to her and for this conversation. So, thank you for being part of the expansion that's happening in your own life and the world. And as always, I do take notes. So if you'd like to just sit back, put your seatbelt on, you will definitely have plenty of notes to review after in the show notes. And as always, we love to hear your feedback. What did you take away from this conversation? How are you going to use what you're getting from here to be your USU? Please let us know. Come to the Facebook group. And as always, it's a blessing to be here with you. So let me introduce you to today's guest. I'm so excited. We have Rosie Acosta. Rosie has studied yoga and mindfulness for more than 20 years and has taught for over a decade. She hosts a weekly conversational wellness podcast called Radically Loved. Rosie has traveled all over the world, leading workshops, retreats, and yoga teacher trainings. She's been featured in Yoga Journal, Well and Good, Forbes, the New York Post, and she is just a total badass, and I may say so myself. She lives in Los Angeles, and want to share that Rosie's first book is You Are Radically Loved. And we will have all the links, but you certainly can find out more information about Rosie at radicallyloved.com. I love that title so much. I really want to get into that shortly. But first, Rosie, just want to honor you and thank you. I'm so excited you're here today. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for creating such a beautiful community and such a beautiful platform to be able to share these stories. I mean, this is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think what might be helpful is I always like to just kind of go back a little bit for people that don't know you or don't know your story. I don't know, maybe you did come out of the womb like super present and mindful and aware. And I have a feeling, which is what I've been learning on the journey, is oftentimes we are teaching things that we need to be reminded of to live. And just to hear a little bit of your story and how maybe to share with us, how did you find yourself into this world of yoga, of teaching around compassion, and what was the impetus for getting into this work?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'd love to say that I came out of the womb and was totally just enlightened and present. And unfortunately, that was not the case for me. I was always a very connected child. I definitely did always feel like the world was so much bigger than where I was. I grew up in East Los Angeles during a very chaotic time in LA history. It was the height of gang violence and drug wars, and it was very, very much a unpleasant existence.
Mm,
However, when you grow up in a situation like that, and so is everybody else, you don't really know that there's anything noteworthy about it. You just grow up being in this hyper vigilant state your entire
mm,
life. And the environment that I was in, the neighborhood that I grew up in, was largely um, immigrant families and a lot of unsupervised adolescence, which, you know, as the time proceeded, it became more and more chaotic. So it wasn't abnormal to live through a drive-by shooting or to see fights erupt in the middle of class. This kind of
mm.
you know, I talk about movies like Higher Learning, or not Higher Learning, but uh I can't even remember what the name of this movie was called, but it was an Edward James Olmos movie where he was the God, now it's like right at the tip of my tongue. Anyway, he was a teacher, and it's literally like scanning in my brain right now. I'm like, "Doo, doo, 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 doo." He's a high school teacher, and you see all these, like, disenfranchised adolescents being unruly, and chaotic. And I remember watching that movie being like, oh, this is normal.
Mm.
This is normally what it's like, what people do. So by the time I was a teenager, I was getting into trouble with the law. I was getting arrested and drinking and smoking pot and just being a normal kid for where I was. And by the time I was 15, the third time I got arrested for trying to steal a cop car. And I got booked and I was in this cell waiting for one of my parents to come pick me up because I was afraid that I'm like, this is it. I really did it this time. I'm going to jail. And the booking officer looked at me and said, welcome to a life in the system. And that for me was, I think, the turning point where I realized that this was not what I was meant to be doing. And what was really interesting is that as a kid, I was so imaginative. I loved writing. I was such a creative person, but it always felt like I needed to hide who I was because it felt like not what everybody else did. So that really helped me wake up to who I was and this inner strength that I had that I needed in order to put me in to the direction of changing my behavior and changing my habits. That and I got put on probation for 2 years. So it wasn't like I could be the same troublemaking child. I mean, I guess I could have, but I didn't want to go to jail. I'd seen what had happened to so many of my friends that had gone through the system. And for Black and brown kids, once they go in the system, there is no coming out of the system. I mean, it doesn't make it, the system's not really built for you to get out of it. And I think that this is still a big issue in 2022 that we have, even with all the programs and the attention on dealing with at-risk youth that even I work with. It's still very much a difficult system to get out of. So during this time, I was struggling with debilitating panic attacks, and my mom's friend had suggested that I try meditation, that it was something that would help alleviate my stress. It would help my panic attacks. And I decided to give it a try. I found these pamphlets that my mom had brought were from the Self-Realization Fellowship. So if anybody out there is familiar with Autobiography of a Yogi, Self-Realization Fellowship, Paramahansa Yogananda came to the West in the early 30s and brought yoga and meditation and all of these Eastern philosophies that at the time were really, like taboo and really witchy and kind of cool. And so for me, I'm a recovering Catholic. So anything outside of Catholicism was really intriguing. And so it became quite a natural transition for me to dive in to yogic philosophy and to learn about mindfulness and Buddhism and meditation. And that's what started to open my door to who I was and what I was. And I continue to ask myself those probing questions of who am I and what is it that I actually want and who do I want to be in this life. And that's really what set the tone for the rest of my life.
Wow. That is, I'm just taking note here and, I like, whew, I have this moment of just, first of all, honoring all of the, as you said, the brown and Black kids that don't get out of the system, the gift that you did get out and that you not only got out, but like found meditation, found this doorway that led you into a whole other. I mean, I definitely want to talk about this, these great, really powerful questions. Who am I? Who do I want to be? just you really getting that moment of clarity and kind of waking up and seeing, okay, it could go this way or that way. And you really, it's powerful. And I go to, how do we help those that don't have, that? I looked it up. I think the movie was Stand and Deliver, if
Stand
that's
and
what it
Deliver.
was.
Yes, thank
Yes.
you. Oh my
I was
goodness.
like,
I was
I gotta find this.
ugh, I kept
Okay.
thinking it was like Higher Learning. Higher Learning was actually another really great film, but I think this was
Yeah.
Michael Rappaport was in that, and it was college students. Another really great film, by the way, if you've never
Higher
seen it.
Learning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great
Stand and
film.
Deliver. I remember my mom was like, you've got to watch. This was in the I think early 90s, maybe it
Yeah,
came out. And I knew exactly when you're talking, like, it's got to be that film. It's got to be the film.
yeah,
And I remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, just that one teacher, changed the world. And your mom's friend, I mean, I had chills, like suggesting meditation. And it just feels like that was the doorway. I just keep seeing this doorway for you, Rosie, where all of a sudden, your whole lens, your whole perspective shifted. And maybe tell us a little more. So you started really getting into Yogananda's teachings, yoga, like, and how did that inform that deeper question of like, who really am I and who do I want to be?
yeah. I think I did dive into SRF teachings for a long time. However, I never. So I'm not a self-realization fellowship practitioner, but I did learn a lot, and I did very much align with the philosophies and the pillars of that belief system. But what it did do was opened my mind and perspective to more teachings from the Dalai Lama. I had also
Mm.
I just at the same time The Art of Happiness had just came out by the Dalai Lama. It was in 1998. I was a sophomore in high school, and I remember reading that book and just being totally blown away by what happiness meant, what it meant to be happy, the power of kindness and compassion. And I was always such an empathetic person, I'm such a like emotional being, and
Yeah.
it these types of Eastern philosophies just made so much sense. And I think just going back to your question of opening that door to who and what I really was just fascinating to me, because I did always feel like I was watching my life happen to me
Mm.
as opposed to me being a part of it. And I go back, the reason I'm going to bring up the kids again, I've been doing, since the book came out, I've been going to a lot of schools, high schools, to go speak to the kids. This is, you do one and all of a sudden all the other ones are calling you to come do assemblies or to do speaking, and it's incredible. And I've been doing work with at-risk youth for the last 15 years. But I think about, kids that don't have mentors or models. It makes it really difficult to start to see a world outside of what you have, especially when for a lot of first generation kids, you're stuck between worlds. You're being raised in this culture that is yours as an American, but also you have another foot into a different culture, whether it be, whatever it is, it's from another country, it's another language. So there is already this cognitive dissonance that's happening in the midst of this already very difficult moment in our lives where we're trying to figure out who we are. And you are torn between two different worlds. And I feel like it's such a nuanced process or assimilation, if you want to call it, that happens that isn't talked about a lot. It definitely was not talked about when I was a teenager.
Mm.
And all we want at that age is to fit in. We want to belong. And so one of the questions that one of these kids asked me during one of these assemblies was, how did you survive having to cut off your friends? Because I talked about how exactly they wanted to know exactly how I got out of trial. Like, what did I have to do? And so exactly what I had to do was, after that incident, I had to excommunicate myself from my friends, essentially. And these are childhood friends that I went to elementary school with. You have to extract yourself from your tribe, which is one of our biggest fears, right? To
Mm.
excommunicate yourself means to die, and exile means to die. So in a sense, you have to allow that part of yourself to die, which is really scary because we have this desire to belong. And so I just jumped and would go to the library. I'd have to, this where that like nuanced thing happens, where I'd have to get into trouble to get detention. So I didn't have to go and hang out with everybody. So I'd have to
Mm.
get into trouble to go get detention so I can spend recess in the library, until I finally talked to the librarian and convinced her to just let me come hang out there every day at lunch, because I couldn't, and it didn't matter, back then you tell somebody you're getting bullied and they didn't care, it's not like, okay,
Mm.
so what, everybody gets bullied, like just go deal with it. Um, and this is
Mhm.
also like late 90s, right? When you're going to school, we don't have as many tools as we have now, as much education as we have now, but really showing these kids the example of, you have autonomy, you have agency, you can survive even when you feel like you're alone. Somehow the right people will always come into the picture, the right guidance will always show up. And there's that idea of being radically loved and what being radically loved means, and being able to anchor yourself into the idea of, you want to call it faith, you want to call it positive thinking, you want to call it anchoring into the present moment, however you want to term it. The idea is the same, that we will be supported one way or another, if that's what you want to anchor into. At the beginning of this podcast, you asked to set an intention. And I feel like it's such a powerful thing to learn this at a young age, to show kids that they are way more powerful than they give themselves credit, than they think, that they have the autonomy to create their own friend group, to create their own bubble, to create their own environment, to extract themselves from a situation where they're getting abused or getting bullied or not feeling supported. But it's hard, it's definitely not easy. The kids today, I have so much compassion. I don't know that I don't say this to them while I'm there, but I'm like, I don't know that I'd be able to survive the environment with social media, with everything that is coming at them now. you know if I'm in the same situation again, I don't know that I could do it.
Mm. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I having kids now that are in this different, different, not growing up necessarily in what we're talking about, but with social media, with
It's hard.
pandemic.
It's
Yeah,
hard.
it's a
It
whole,
doesn't matter whether that's, and this is the other thing,
yeah,
I'm going to schools, that inner city schools, I'm going to nice private tech
yeah,
high schools,
yeah,
and the issues are the same,
yeah.
you know. And I really feel for these kids. It's tough. It is a tough environment out there.
Your message, I've got like chills all over my arms, Rosie. I'm just, whew, I'm actually just going back to what you were saying, even just really tuning into when you had to use getting into trouble, detention to start shifting. It was your best way of knowing at that point, knowing how to really find that autonomy, change direction. But I mean, I was thinking about it, I'm still best friends with literally my oldest best friend since we were 6. Like I just spoke to her yesterday and I'm like, I can't even imagine, like having to take yourself out of that group and what you did and your wisdom and your knowing that. And it's so interesting that there were kids asking you that, and to be able to teach and to share, like, wow, what you did was you actually really leaned on books and learning and wisdom outside of yourself, that ironically now with Radically Loved, like this is what you're doing. Like I just got this image of kids like putting themselves in the library and getting your book. You have the Art of Happiness, and your book, which is it just feels very full circle and so needed, and not easy. And I think what you're saying, for any of us to take ourselves out of a system where the primary human need is to feel loved
Mm.
and to feel like we're part, we're part of something, we belong. I mean,
Yeah.
you literally, like you said, you
Yeah.
extricated yourself
Well,
out
I
of
have
that.
a question for you if I can ask one. And because
Yeah.
you are also an author and this is the work that you do, this was
Yep.
actually one of the questions that the kids asked me. And I'm like, I've been
Yeah.
asking people. Um, he said, what do you do if you're trying to find who you are, but you also can't separate from your friends? Essentially, your friends think you are a certain way, but internally you feel like a different person. What do you do?
Oh, that's a good question. I have couple. I mean, I'll share really briefly because I want to make sure to ask you, but no, it's a great question. I'd love to
Yeah.
hear your thoughts too. So I actually, in my humble opinion, I believe that everything kind of starts on that energetic level within ourselves. So what I saw happen, because this actually happened a bit when I was in a marriage that was similar. It wasn't like just a friend. I actually like married, family,
You're
his
actually married with
family,
this person.
friends. Yeah. And I did a lot of inner work, a lot. It's where my book came from. And I started to see, oh my gosh, it wasn't, I mean, I don't blame anybody. I don't even blame myself. It just, I started shifting, like you, reading more, doing a lot of these questions, introspection, and something shifted in me where I was still there, but I felt like it's not aligning. It's not, and I didn't have the words. This is like 15 years ago. I was like, I don't have the words, but energetically we're not meshing. For me, that's how I just couldn't put my finger on it. And eventually over time I kept doing these little habits and things to really take care of myself, gratitude journals, meditating, yoga, things that were not in that community or others were doing. And this is what I believe, eventually our outer world is going to match the inner world. And so it's not tomorrow, it wasn't the next day, and it was not fun and it was challenging, but it was one of the most important moments for me, because I came up to that point, I'm chills again, where I realized it's just it's not matching, the friends, and there was nothing wrong with these people. It wasn't the right energetic fit, and we didn't connect. And so I did that. And I mean, the challenging thing is I have kids and I'm still kind of like have a little bit of a cord still to that community, and that's fine. And but that for me was really honoring myself, but it didn't happen overnight. And I think staying true to who you are. And so I always say, follow the energy, follow where you feel connected and where it feels heart-centered and good. And for me, going to these support groups, doing these writings, doing programs like, I did a personal growth program or a mindfulness program, like that felt right.
Mm.
I would go to this Unitarian church with Tara Brock, and that was definitely like not exactly the situation I was in. Like, you don't really do that. So, and I just would do it because I'm like, that feels right to me. So I think when coming from do no harm, which is a very beautiful Buddhist, value, or could be a human value, to do no harm. It's like just honoring yourself. And as long as you're not harming others, listen in and take care of yourself. And like you said in what you were saying in your book, you will naturally you can't stay in a place if you're not aligned energetically. That's kind of I know it's a little more esoteric, but that is what I believe. And I saw it. And I did choose to, as best as I could, lovingly end that friendship, relationship, everything, because I couldn't do it anymore. But it did not happen overnight, and it was not easy. And I relate to what you were saying. I had to take myself out of it, and yeah,
And
not
that's
my
like that's so courageous. I mean, that really requires a lot of courage
yeah,
because it's the survival thing, it's the
yeah,
survival mechanism within us that says, if you leave, you don't know what's out there.
yeah,
If you take yourself out of this tribe or this relationship, you don't know what's out there, and it can be crippling to even just think about it. So yeah, that's incredible. And I also love what you said about eventually your external will match your internal. And I love the subtlety of the eventually, because time is implicit. And I think that a lot of the times we forget how much time
yeah.
things actually take. We're so conditioned and used to everything being so instantaneous, everything happening yesterday, instead of us leaning into the fact that things take time, right? So we grow monarchs at our house. We're a
Mm,
butterfly home sanctuary. And to be able to see these tiny eggs grow into caterpillars and then create this very intricate, in tight chrysalis pupa, like the home that these beings go into. And eventually they have to push through a tiny little pinhole to become and emerge a monarch butterfly. I mean, there is no fast forwarding. There is a set time that this takes. This takes time. There is no instant you go from egg to butterfly. It takes time. And I always love to look to nature whenever I'm feeling stuck or I'm encountering something that is difficult. I have to just sit back and remember, oh, right, this is a process. Our life is a process. We're in process right now. I wonder what process I'm in right now. I wonder if
mm.
I'm in the caterpillar phase, or I wonder if I'm in the chrysalis phase,
Beautiful. I'm like, this is my sister from another mister. I can't believe we don't know each other, because we do now, but I'm like, oh my gosh. It's a beautiful imagery with the eggs. And it's something I want to say to that is, oftentimes the people around us, I think you have to be mindful of who you're showing or sharing those little eggs with. And if there isn't somebody, then guard, lovingly, not guard them from fear, but guard them with your heart, like guard, because what I found is that, I might, people listen, we might be those that are like, nurture the eggs, but some people get, triggered by that. And that we don't want to let those eggs be under the light of somebody, their opinions and judgments, before it's had time to do its thing. And I love what you said about nature and being reminded, like, that's a great question. What process are you in? What part of the system of the natural rhythm are you in? And um, I just think back to what you were saying with radically loved, which I want to even hear more about. But to answer your question that you're asked a lot, I actually think the underlying piece to all of it is it was deciding I'm going to radically love myself over everything else, enough that I'm going to honor the path that I'm being guided in myself. And I
Mhm.
think that was really, and that's what I hear what you did. And that takes something, yet it's hard to give the kind of love if I am not, surrounding and nourishing myself with that. And so anyhow, I was just like, oh, that is so connected to your topic. I
Yeah.
believe that's so important.
Yeah. I love that. It's so good. I'm like, tell me more. I want to say more.
I'm like, I want to hear more with you. Like,
Uh,
tell me. Oh my gosh, just love your energy. I'd love to hear with Radically Loved, like that came, how that came into conception and
yeah, like
birth
so
and
radical. So I'm sorry I cut you off, but I'm like, this is
oh,
just I love this question when people ask, because I always have to revert back to how I felt I had to be. I'm like a rebel, I'm like I was a misfit, I was like a little punk rock kid, and I was so much about Rage Against the Machine, like I was a rebel. And so for me, in order to make the change that I needed to make, I needed to be a radical. I needed to swim up the stream. I needed to move against the grain. I needed to be different. And it felt like, in order for me to find what was going to anchor me into this world, that was going to anchor me into who I was the knowledge that I would be supported regardless, that I would feel guided no matter what, that I would have the ground underneath my feet, whether I could see it or not. And so that's where the idea of being radically loved was born, and I feel like it encompassed everything that I wanted to bring to the world, every message that I wanted to share, starting the podcast, starting my website, when I would write. So writing for me was always my most rewarding form of communication. And so back in 2009, I started a blog, and I started to write every week. And this was after not writing for probably 8 or 9 years. I stopped, I don't know, I wrote up until, I was going to college, and I was taking a couple of creative writing courses. And I ended up going to school for business marketing, which I guess served me later on. But I always had a passion for writing. I wrote my first little book when I was 6 years old. My kindergarten teacher created these prompts, um, these like little essay prompts that we would fill in. And at the end of the year, she bound them and created this book. And I think that that's what opened up my desire to at some point actually write a book. And so when I started blogging back in 2009, I wanted to figure out exactly what I wanted to say. Like, what do I want to say to the world? If I can speak to people, what do I want to say? And at the time, I was teaching yoga and meditation. I was working for a personal trainer, and I just had this desire that I wanted to teach everything I had learned. And I was trying to figure out like how to encompass it all. And so that's where Radically Loved was born. It just felt like it really filled all of those questions.
mm. It's such a powerful story to hear your journey. Like, I'm just thinking back from the trying to take a cop's car to like then taking yourself out of the, with your friend, excommunicating yourself to then reading to meditate. Just, it's a beautiful journey. And coming back to, it took time. This didn't happen overnight, which I think is important to say. I am curious, you probably get this. For somebody, a kid or adult or anyone who struggles with feeling radically loved and really like taking that in, where do you think is the place to start? Like how do you tap into that essence, that feeling?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And one that I always have to find the right answer to, because I don't ever want people to feel like it's something that they should already have or know. What I like to describe it as, think about radical love as this sphere of energy that is ever present that you step into, as opposed to something that you already have. And this specifically is for people who have a hard time getting there, or who have never felt it, or don't even know what love is, or being in love, or loving themselves. Think about it as a conduit that is constantly flowing with love, that is never ending, that is eternal. And it's a place where when you decide, when you set the intention, or you have the desire, you can step into and just be filled by it. Now, energetically, that sounds great and it sounds lovely, and it is. But sometimes when we are in that state of unease, or we are grieving, or we are in a valley of some sort, it's really difficult to find where that conduit is.
Yeah.
And so I have to go back to the Buddhist teachings of being present and being where you are, and practicing self-compassion and kindness to yourself, befriending yourself, giving yourself the nourishment that you need in those moments, because you need a friend in that moment. And I think that the best way of opening that door, or creating the pinhole in the chrysalis, is to be compassionate towards yourself, to give yourself that space.
Beautiful. Beautiful, Rosie. I sometimes feel just being a human, you know, when a human being on the constant evolution process, you know, this is the one I'm like constantly playing with, reminding myself of. And I think I know I'm not alone. And I really believe this is the core of so much pain and hurt and stuckness is what you're really talking about here, which is when it is difficult to be the kind of friend to yourself that you would be to your best friend, which so many people, and I've been there many times. It's a real, it takes something, because many of us are not wired or conditioned to do that. And I think yeah, the way you just said it, really like that full befriending of yourself, to me, it's probably one of the most important things that we can learn to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not, I mean, obviously it's not always easy, but it is possible. And I think it's always so fascinating how we can treat others with so much respect and love, and then turn around and not give ourselves the time of day when we need to rest. Or it's so easy to tell somebody to take a break, to give themselves a lunch break or a breakfast break or a whatever, and we won't turn around and do the same for ourselves. And I think it's one of those things, right? It's called to practice for a reason. But we practice because we forget. That's why it's called to practice. So I think as long as we continue to have patience and compassion towards ourselves, it opens up that doorway that we've been talking about this entire time. It could be the doorway to radical love, or the doorway to finding your truest and highest self. It can be the doorway to achieving whatever desires you have of, you know, higher awareness, higher consciousness, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that reminder. That's why we call it a practice, because it's not like you ever fully, I know I seem to forget, the whole one day at a time. I'm like, oh gosh, yep, here we are. Reminding myself to practice once again and being kind about that. The questions you had brought up earlier, I'm just curious before we wrap, like to really what's there for me is I'm like, you would ask these questions early of yourself. Who am I? Who do I want to be? And I'm curious now with all that you've created that you're doing, who is it that you want to be in this world? What is that legacy, that greater vision that you see for yourself moving forward now being, with radically loved, with where you are? What is it that's most important to
Yeah.
you?
Oh, I don't
And
know. I'm still trying to figure it out. You
yeah.
know, I really, I think that's part of what drives me and what keeps me moving. I'm the perpetual student. Uh, I'm still learning just like everybody else. Um, what I do know is that I want to be me. I don't want to be anybody else. I feel
Mm.
like the gift of radical love has given me a deep reverence and love for the person that I am. And I hope I never lose that, because I know it's easy to be self-deprecating and to treat yourself in a way. And obviously, I speak from experience. So I want to just continue to be the highest version of myself. I always ask people, or, every time I end a class, if it's a meditation or a yoga class, I've not actually taught many yoga class the last couple of years, but I still have this desire to go back into the classroom. I yearn for those days when I could go into the studio and I had my normal class, my students, and now it's like a different world. I'm an author, I'm podcasting, I'm speaking, I'm doing all these really incredible things, but there's that yearning, right, where it's like, things are so much easier when I could just go to my Tuesday, Thursday, 7 a.m. class and talk to my students. But I always end the class saying, may this practice serve you in your highest good. May it help us reframe negativity and choose responses that are helpful and uplifting, receiving whatever insight this practice had to offer us with an open heart and an open mind. And I say that every class because I believe it, and I try to intend that myself. So although I think it's great to have a desire for great things in the world, to accomplish many many goals, many benchmarks and milestones, at the end of the day, I want to just be able to enjoy this version of me, who I am now, because this version is not going to be the same tomorrow. It might not be the same by dinner. you know
There's some truth there. I've been there. Yep. I love it. Oh, I love that. That's gorgeous. I was just thinking as you were saying that, as we started in the beginning with our intention, um, what you had said, and just feeling like that is always with any conversation here, right? I'm like, oh, please, may everybody listening like get the insight they needed today for their highest self. And I love how you just said it, really even way more eloquently than what I said. And I'm curious, I always like to ask this question before we finish, because I like to give that, your heart wisdom a chance to speak. I call them heart flares, where, is there a heart flare? Is there something maybe I didn't ask you, or just something coming through that you are feeling moved to share or speak? You don't have to, but if there's anything that you just want to leave us all with, that's kind of channeling through, I always like to give room for the heart flares.
yeah, I love a good heart flare. I think that what's come up in the last couple of days for me, with regard to just interactions I've had with people, follow new followers, people that are messaging me. I want people to feel encouraged to continue their path, to keep writing or keep podcasting or keep doing the things, even though it might not look like people are paying attention or listening or watching or reading. There is somebody out there that needs that message. My life is proof that the 2 or 3 people that said the right thing in that right moment, I heard it. And if it wasn't for those tiny anchor points or those small God shots that I call them, that you get randomly, a podcast you listen to might inspire you to go for a walk or go for a run or go to the class or open your manuscript back up or start podcasting again. Don't be discouraged by what you think success looks like, because it's not that. So that's it. That's my little heart there.
That is so powerful. We could do a whole nother conversation on that, Rosie. Maybe round 2 at some point. I'm like, oh, we got to unpack that. I think that is it's such a beautiful place to land. And really coming back to, if there's that desire to share it, trusting, kind of what you said earlier with radically love, trusting their ears to receive it. Otherwise you wouldn't have that desire. And it's just beautiful the way you said it. I love that. Yeah. To keep going, keep doing it. And thankfully, I mean, think of you, thank God you came back to your writing. You said in 2009, the blogging that probably opened up to eventually writing your book and what you've been doing.
Yeah, there was a lot of start and stops even after 2009. I want to be clear. There was a lot of discouragement, like I got rejected 32 times while I was writing my book proposal. I mean, there's a lot of start and stops, and I think that's okay. I think it's important for people to know that that's okay. It's okay to pause and come back, but don't ever let it stop you from doing something that you really want to do.
All right. Amen to that. I think that is like, drop the mic. I got nothing else to say, but I am so grateful that the universe put us in connection here. I've just loved every moment, soaking up your wisdom. Yeah, you're amazing. Thank you. Thank you. We're so grateful to have you here and appreciate your light and your willingness to keep going.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Youest listeners, again for another amazing conversation. And we'll have all the links and information in the show notes. And as always, so honored to be part of your journey, actualizing and being and becoming your Youest. So much love. See you soon.